UFC Vegas 54 is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. I'm going to give you some props that I like. We'll talk about some lineup construction and we'll build lineups later in the video, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. We crushed last week, we really did. Even with the Cowboy and Joe Lozon falling off, we still called a bunch of things that happened last week from a straight betting perspective we could not miss. And if you don't believe me, go back and watch the end of the final picks video and watch me call. I think it was either 7 of 8 or 8 of 9 things that I called happened. So if you want the money, pay attention, place the bets, and let's get ready to rock. Now, luckily for us, there haven't been any changes to the card throughout the week. However, make sure you're paying attention right up until lock, but I'm hopeful that the MMA gods will let these 11 fights hold up. And we don't have the biggest slate to work with. 11 fights is a much smaller slate, and there isn't much star power this week, but we are in the apex, which means we have the smaller cage, so we know it's going down like the crypto market this week, so I'm excited. And since there haven't been any changes to the card yet, we can get right into lineup builds after we look at the value plays at 8,000 and below. The first value play that I like this week is actually Allan Patrick at 7,800. So earlier in the week, I told you that it was hard for me to come up with a winner here, but now it's becoming a little bit more clear to me that we need to go this route if we're going to be targeting this fight. And I'll be honest, this is way more of just fading Michael Johnson than it is wanting to play Allan Patrick, but I do think that he has the tools to win this fight. Johnson has looked terrible in the last few years. He doesn't defend takedowns well, and he's got decent hand speed, but his punches at times could be a bit wild, and he's not really landing heavy. And to me, this looks like a very winnable fight for Patrick, especially if he fights a good game plan, and he normally does score pretty well, even in decisions. Let's say this fight does go the distance. Well, if we come down here, we've seen him go the distance 4 times in the UFC, posting scores of 59, which isn't great, but then he follows that up with 106, 90, 121, and it's not only because he's securing takedowns, but he's getting a ton of control time with that strong jiu-jitsu of his, and you would expect that coming out of that camp. And that's what makes me feel confident about Patrick in this spot, because we've seen Michael Johnson smothered on the ground, and if we look at even a common opponent like Stevie Ray, he fought both of these guys, and they were 2 very different fights. Stevie Ray was able to take Michael Johnson down, he was able to control him for a couple of minutes during their fight, and he also beat him on the total striking output numbers. But when Stevie Ray fought Allan Patrick, Patrick was able to get him down 5 times, secure over 12 minutes of control time. To me, that makes this pick seem pretty straightforward. And at this point, at this stage in their careers, it seems downright irresponsible to pick Michael Johnson as a favorite. So I like the dog here. I like Allan Patrick. I think there's good value with his win condition. I don't expect him to win and put up a bad score, because if he's winning this fight, it's going to be on the ground. And not only is it going to be on the ground, but it's going to be on the ground on his terms. So give me Allan Patrick this week. We're looking at solid value at 7,800. Next is kind of a heart versus brain matchup where you want one fighter to win, but logic will tell you that the other fighter wins. But the heart and the mind have become more aligned with this pick for me here at 7,600. We have Amanda Ribas. She's fighting Katlyn Chookagian this week. I call her Chookagian because a lot of people are picking her to win, but I really do think that Ribas has some advantages in this fight. She's going to be the stronger, more willing grappler. She's moving up a weight class, and this is where I think she belongs, and she's the more dangerous fighter overall. She's recorded several knockouts and submissions recently. On the other side, Katlyn Chookagian has a 17% finish rate as a pro, 0% finish rate in the UFC. So I think once Ribas starts to realize that she doesn't really need to respect the power or lack thereof from Katlyn Chookagian coming back, then she's going to work harder to close the distance, get her takedowns, work her jiu-jitsu from there. And you might look at this loss in her second to last fight and think, well, Kunith, Marina Rodriguez sent her to the Shadow Realm. It's true, that happened, but it was against Marina Rodriguez, so there's no shame in that. It happens to a lot of people. And to take it a step further, I think if Ribas is having success grappling in this fight, then she's probably going to find her way to Chookagian's back, where she might be able to find a submission at that point. I don't think Katlyn Chookagian is above getting submitted at this point in her career. I know it hasn't happened to her as a pro, but at the same time, I think it's very possible. It's very live in this spot. So give me the grappling grappling upside, give me the physical strength at this weight class. I think she's a good value this week at 7,600. Next at 7,500, it's no surprise. We have Jan Blachowicz. He's going to be in our main event. He's definitely going to be popular on DraftKings for sure, not only being in the main event, but I actually expect him to be the higher owned side of this matchup. But I think it's for good reason. Like we talked about earlier in the week, he's going to have the advantages in a few different spots. He's got the striking power advantage. We've seen him go 5 rounds. He might have some success grappling as well. And if this fight does end up going the distance, then we're looking at a situation where it's going to be an excellent stacking option for cash just because of both of these fighters' output as well as the grappling from either side. And we're going to be working on these lineups later in the video. But I think the later that this fight goes, the more I like Polish power to start connecting. I think the better Jan will start to look. And I think Rakic will revert to that slow, boring, very heavy leg kick dependent pace. So the pick is still Jan Blachowicz. I know that earlier in the week I said I might change my mind, but I do like Jan Blachowicz in this spot. And we know if he wins and he looks good, he probably gets a title shot after Yuri smokes Glover Teixeira later this year. So give me Jan Blachowicz to win at 7,500. Next at 7,400, I've got Allan Nascimento. He's fighting Jake Hadley this week, and the more that I look at this fight, the more I like Nascimento. I'm not saying he's a lock, I'm not saying it's a definite, but I do think that there's some significant value on this side, especially down at this price, because he's fought the better competition, he's giant for the weight class, he's got a slick ground game, and he's not going to have those debut jitters like he might have had against Tagir Ulanbekov. On the other side with Hadley, he is undefeated, he's looked good, but he hasn't fought the best competition up until this point, and he's going to look to grapple in this fight, I'm guessing, and that's probably a mistake. I don't think that he's going to have the same ability to nullify the submission attempts of Nascimento the same way that Tagir Ulanbekov was able to do, and I'm hoping Nascimento's fight with Ulanbekov will be a fight that he's able to build off of, he's able to learn from. We talked a little bit about this last week with CJ Vergara, where he lost his UFC debut, but he wasn't dominated, he wasn't outclassed, he just didn't start strong enough. So from a betting standpoint, there was a lot to like about CJ Vergara after that performance going into last week, where he actually did fight with pace and pressure from the opening bell and was able to pull the big upset. And I think we see a similar situation here where Nascimento fights with more urgency. He works to improve position more than just throwing up submissions and accepting bottom like he did in his debut. I think this fight does go the distance, and I don't know if we're going to see a super high DraftKings score out of him in this spot, even if he does win. But I do think that there's value here given his price and the limited underdog pool that we have to work with. We have 11 fights. I expect maybe 3 underdogs to win this week. Now, I know that I've already said 4 underdogs that I think have a chance. I'm not saying that all of them are going to win, but I do see a situation where a couple of them are going to win. And this next value play, which is actually our last value play, I'm actually really confident that he's going to win. All the way down at the bottom of the pricing, we have Andre Petroski at 6,900. He's our first fight of the night, which is important. It's important because everyone is going to be on Nick Maximov for the grappling upside and hoping that Petroski gasses out. And that is totally valid. Maximov is a huge favorite. He has access to the highest score on the card here. I'm not saying that it's impossible that he wins, but I can't help but like Petroski in this spot. Before I break down a card, I always look at the card and pick who I like. I go based on my memory, based on things that I've seen in the past, and I really liked Andre Petroski to win this fight because I think that Nick Maximov, despite being undefeated, is pretty beatable. And then you go through and you look at the odds, and a lot of the spots are pretty obvious. Oh, I thought he would be a favorite, I thought she would be a favorite, but when I saw the line as wide as it is for this fight, I was shocked. I thought this would be a lot closer. I didn't think Nick Maximov would be a minus 400 favorite or anything close to that. I didn't expect that. And there are a couple of things that stood out to me that I came across during the week, and if you've watched this channel, you know that I don't believe in coach speak. I don't believe in the fighter interviews where they say, this is the best shape I've ever been in, best training camp of my life, blah, 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 because it's largely nonsense. But I did catch an interview the other day with John Morgan.
I'm a man of my word, John. 10 push-ups if you want to answer for me.
Where he was talking with Petroski, and Petroski actually said that he's asked the UFC for this fight specifically multiple times. He felt his teammate Cody Brundage could have beat Maximov if he fought a little harder. He asked for the fight immediately after. And then he asked for the fight again after seeing Maximov beat Punahele Soriano because he believes he has the recipe to beat him. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that this will be the first time we've seen Petroski in the UFC with a full camp under his belt. So I'm hoping that dispels the whole poor gas tank narrative, and he's able to put a pace on Maximov, eventually breaking him. And I don't think anybody would argue that this is clearly the toughest test of Nick Maximov's young career, who's largely a lay-and-pray guy against somebody in Petroski who's always finding the finish in his fights. And again, this is the first fight of the night. This is giving us a chance to get huge leverage over the field, start the night with a massive win on our lineups, and still be able to afford the expensive guys at the top. So huge value here. It's very boom or bust, obviously, but I'm leaning toward boom. And I will still build lineups with Maximov in them just to give you a look. If you think that he's going to win, I don't blame you, but at the same time, don't look at the price and think that it's impossible for this guy to get the victory. He's the better striker, hits a lot harder. He's the more dangerous grappler when it comes to submissions. We're just hoping that he doesn't get out-wrestled for 3 rounds like Maximov has done to a lot of his opponents in the past. And now we can build some lineups, but before we do, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works, and it's really helping. It really helped last time. The views are going up, 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 up. Now for starters, we're going to start out with cash games, right? That's where we preserve our money. That's where we stay safe. And I've talked to a couple of you who play your cash games and say, oh my gosh, thank you, I'm so glad that I started playing cash games, this is way better. And then some of you who are completely ignoring it. Listen, man, play your damn cash games. You can still play your tournaments, still play your GPPs, still get a chance at all the big money, get the pot at the end of the rainbow, but protect yourself, be responsible, play these cash games because it's still exciting, you're still putting yourself in a position to make money, and it's a lot easier to make cash game lineups than it is to make a GPP lineup that's going to beat 1,000 other people. But for starters with the cash game, I do think that the main event goes the distance. I don't think we have a situation like Carlos Esparza, Rose Namajunas go the distance. And even with a stinker like that, they were still cashing in the cash game lineup. So I think you're going to have a much better time stacking Jan Blachowicz and Aleksandar Rakic this week. So now there are one of 2 ways that you can go. What I'm going to be looking at is possibly coming down here to Andrea Petroski even in the cash game lineups, because now you've got 89.66 left per fighter, so you can go right up to the top and get the guys that you feel good about. You could grab Davey Grant, you can grab Tatsuro, and then you're able to grab Jake Hadley if you wanted to. If you weren't sold on Jake Hadley, you can come down from him to grab somebody like Cutelaba. Now you've got 8,900 left over. This is where you'd have to go to that mid-range, which I'm really not too crazy about. This looks pretty safe if you think that Jake Hadley is definitely going to beat Allan Nascimento. I'm not totally sold, so I think I might take him out. Now we've got to do a little bit of rearranging. So if I come here and I grab, say, Cutelaba, who I know is going to be pretty popular, and then we look at Katlyn Chookagian, got 300 salary left over. If you weren't sold on Petroski, you could take him out. You can come down here and grab one of these 2, but I think that he has a better chance of winning than both of these guys. But something like this is probably where I'm going to land for the week. There's another way that you could approach the cash games as well. I'll show you here. If you wanted to play Maximov in your cash games because you feel like he's going to get to that high score that he's totally capable of achieving, this would be a smart way to build your lineups as well. You have Maximov, you're stacking the main event. You've got Manuel Torres, who's probably going to win by way of knockout in this spot. Andrea Lee winning based on volume. Allan Patrick based on takedowns and control time. Ultimately, I'm going to put my cash game lineup on Twitter. We are 2 for 2 since starting, so make sure you follow the Twitter so you can see the cash game lineup that I'll drop just a few hours before lock. But it's probably going to be a build similar to what we were just looking at. Now for tournaments, let me first build what I think you'll probably see most in your tournaments this week. Nick Maximov is going to be extremely popular this week. I believe Iwan Cutelaba is probably going to be extremely popular this week. People want to grab that grappling upside and hope that he wrestles Ryan Spann like he's done in his last 2 fights, posting really high scores inside of 3 rounds. This was a draw. I don't believe a fighter gets any points for a draw, so if you gave him another 30 for the win, you're looking at a situation where he scored 119, 127. These are crazy high scores. But I will tell you right now, these 2 are going to be pretty chalky, but it might be for good reason. Come down here to Jan Blachowicz to balance out the salary. I think a lot of people are banking on the Polish power to get it done this week. You're going to have to grab another underdog unless you stay really close to the mid-range, but let's grab the mid-range picks first, like Manuel Torres. You can grab somebody like Andrea Lee, and now you're stuck having to play Allan Patrick Angela Hill, Amanda Ribas, or Allan Nascimento. I think these bottom 4 aren't going to pull all that much ownership, so you're probably going to see somebody come back with either an Angela Hill or an Amanda Ribas if these are the remaining choices. Now, this isn't a terrible lineup, but I do not expect this lineup to be the one that wins it all. I really don't. You're going to see lineups that look just like that in your contest. The bigger the field, the more you'll see that exact lineup or just that -1 and then swap somebody else in. That's going to be pretty chalky this week. I think good ways to get different this week are targeting Davey Grant. I don't think that he's going to pull the same type of ownership as Maximov. Definitely not as much ownership as Cutelaba. I think him and Tatsuro are probably going to come in at lower ownership than those other two. But even Tatsuro, I expect more people to play him just because that was taken away from them 2 weeks ago. I think that they'll get to him before Davey Grant. So I think playing Davey Grant in your lineups, he's got a good matchup. He's got finishing upside. He's going to come in lower owned than a lot of these other guys. I think this is a good place for you to start building when you're building your GPP lineups. We want to capture finishing upside. We're looking at Manuel Torres at 8,300. Really hoping that he gets the knockout over Frank Camacho, who has not looked good. He's been out of action for a while. I believe he got into a car accident and was out of training for a while. So a lot of question marks with Frank Camacho. I'm not interested in playing him. You're probably going to want to grab one side of the main event. This is the side that I prefer. I do think that he's going to come in at higher ownership, but I think Davey Grant's already helping you. And there are some other ways that we can get different as well. We've got 3 spots left. I think that if you were to play either Petroski, Ryan Spann, or Allan Nascimento, I think those are ways that you can get different and get different successfully. Because here's the thing, Ryan Spann, I think technique-wise, physically, I think he's better than Iwan Cutelaba. It's just a matter of if he's going to do the things that he needs to do to win the fight. He's going to have advantages in height and reach, and he could really find the mark, and he's going to come in at dirt cheap, super low ownership. So he could totally turn the slate on its head with a knockout win, especially sitting in the co-main event spot. That could totally change everything because you're going to look at Cutelaba coming in at 40, 50, 60% in most of your contests, and Ryan Spann probably coming in south of 15%. But if you want to win these tournaments, you're going to have to take risks in some spots. You can't just play the people that everybody feels good about. So let's say for this lineup, we are going to go with Ryan Spann. Got 8,900 left. Now, if you wanted to spend all the salary, you can come up here to somebody like Jake Hadley, hoping for that finishing upside. Finish it off with Tatsuro, because obviously you're not going to put Cutelaba and Spann in the same lineup in a 3-round fight. This is going to be a lot different than most of the field. You're looking at knockout upside, knockout upside. You've also got finishing upside in these 2 spots, and you're hoping that these 2 underdogs are able to separate their opponents from consciousness or at least win based off of points. So this is pretty solid lineup construction. If these guys win, this is probably going to be what shows up at the top of your contests. But there are some tweaks that we can make to this to kind of sweeten the deal a little bit. Let's say we wanted to come off of Ryan Spann, right? Let's say you're not sold. Let's say we grab Petroski, which you might not be crazy about, but I do think that he has a real shot of winning this week at such a low price. So if you went with something like this, well, now you have 400 left on the table. So now you can make some changes, right? Now you can adjust some things, make some swaps, right? Wrong. I don't think you have to. So I've been building lineups throughout the week. I've actually talked to some of you guys about this throughout the week. I feel like this is the kind of week where you could leave salary on the table and really get away with it. Let's say, for example, you're like Jake Hadley, a flyweight making his UFC debut against a guy who might be a better grappler than him. I don't know if I'm totally sold on that. He might not score all that many points. Well, now you're left with Cutelaba, who's going to be super uber chalk. We just came off of Jake Hadley. Rakic, we're already going the other way with Blachowicz in this lineup. Chookagian never posts good scores. Virna Jandiroba, possibly if she's able to find a submission, but Angela Hill does not get finished often. Angela Hill loses often, but she doesn't get finished often, and Angela Hill probably beats her in this fight if it stays standing for a majority of it. Michael Johnson is fraudulent. So you're looking at a situation where if you came off of Hadley, you don't want to go with Cutelaba. You want to leave some salary on the table, and you already have this build in place. The next best available option, in my opinion, is Andrea Lee. So you might be looking at this number and thinking, oh my God, leaving 1,000 salary on the table, that's That's scary. That's too much. But it really might not be, because if we look at this lineup and we allow the lineup to tell us the story of the fight, best case scenario for each fighter, what do we have? Well, Davey Grant knocks out Luis Smolka in the first or second round. Manuel Torres does the same thing to Frank Camacho. Jan Blachowicz wins and scores a decent amount of points with 5 rounds to work. Andre Petroski inside the distance at this price will completely break the slate. Andrea Lee stealing rounds 2 and 3 with volume, pace, pressure, and her own offensive wrestling to get the job done, so she posts a high score. And then Tatsuro Taira finding a rear naked choke in, say, the second round against Carlos Candelario, or getting back control for the first and second round and then finding the finish in the third, scoring around 95 to 100 points. You do this, you leave salary on the table like this, I assure you, if all of those outcomes come through, you'll be at the top of your contests. And I don't want you to look at a situation like this where it's completely impossible for this to be the optimal lineup, because at the end of last year on the Jose Aldo Rob Font card, if I remember correctly, and we talked about this on the channel, the optimal lineup would have left 2,300 salary on the table. With the way that the finishes shook out, there weren't that many fights on that card, there aren't that many fights on this card, a lot of the other fights could end up going the distance. So don't be afraid to leave salary on the table this week to try to get ahead. Another thing you can do if you have this kind of build here and you want to adjust some things is, let's say you took Petroski out and you came up to Nick Maximov. Well, now you have to remove some things, but you've got some high-priced fighters in this lineup, so you're able to do that. Let's say you come off of Tatsuro, you have 7,600. You can come down here to Ribas, Nascimento. In this lineup, you're not playing Cutelaba, so if you wanted to come the other way with Ryan Spann, boom. And this is something that I'm actually going to be practicing with this week. The 300 salary remaining is probably the least amount that I'm going to have in my big contest. I'm going to do the 20 max contest, and I tell you this because I know you like the transparency. I'll do the $3 20 max. I'll enter 20 lineups in it, and then I will sit here and make lineups specifically that have a lot of salary left on the table, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 900, 1,000 left on the table, because this could totally end up being one of those weeks. And you might look at this and think, well, Ryan Spann, I think that he's going to lose. Jan Blachowicz, I'm not really confident. I think that he's going to lose. MMA DFS is not about playing all the people you think are going to win all the time. It's about trying to get into the mind of your opponent, trying to figure out what they're going to do, and then doing the opposite. Because, hey, I mean, if you have the same lineup as half of the field, you lost anyway. You entered your in the contest, lineups lock as soon as the event starts, so the money's gone anyway. So don't be afraid to take chances with your lineups, especially with something like this with 11 fights. A lot of them are really close. We don't have any massive favorites outside of a couple here, so anything could happen this week. Don't be afraid to experiment with things, because a lot of us, I know that this is a real thing, a lot of us have a certain philosophy, a certain way of going about building our lineups week in and week out, and you lose, and lose. But you worry that the one time you don't follow the way that you do it, that's the time that you would have won. I'm telling you now, shake that idea completely. If you've played for a long time and you've never taken down a tournament, you've never taken down a single entry, change what you're doing. And if you feel like week in and week out you make a lineup and the opposite happens and you think, geez, I'm wrong every time, then just make a lineup and then put the opposite side in and try that out. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to have fun with this. That's the whole point. And I'll quickly build one more lineup for you that has Aleksandar Rakic as kind of the focal point. If some of you guys want to go that way in the main event, I don't want to neglect you, so let me show you what you could do. Let's say you take Rakic, let's say you take Davey Grant, let's say you take Tatsuro. Well, now you've really got to save some salary here, so you want to come down to Nascimento. You want to grab somebody like Amanda Ribas. Got 8,200 left over. You're going to be attacking this fight here with your 8,200 left over. Let's say you didn't want to go there because you wanted to grab Manuel Torres. Now you've got 7,500 left over. Then you're looking at either playing a Spann, Candelario, Smolka, or Petroski. But same logic applies. You want to come all the way down here to Petroski. You've left 600 on the table. Not many people in your contests are going to be doing that. That's a good way to get different. And just because there's salary on the table doesn't mean you're leaving points on the table. You get me? And now I'm going to go through some straight bets for you, some prop opportunities that I think you should attack. These were very good to us last week, so there are a couple of spots that we just can't ignore ignore that I do want to tell you about. First, if we come here to DraftKings Sportsbook, which you're probably doing it on the phone because the phone is better, but the same logic applies. If we come here to look at the round props, well, we're looking at a situation where the over in the Angela Hill fight at minus 255, that's cash money. The minus 330 in the Andrea Lee fight, you're looking at a situation where it's probably best to just put these two together. And then you could even come down here to the Amanda Ribas, Katlyn Chookagian fight at over 2.5. And you're looking at a total of plus 150 basically if you parlayed those all together. These bets, the over round props in women's MMA is hitting at over 74%. We talked about that data a little bit earlier in the week, so if you haven't already, go back and take a look at that video. But this is something that you can do. These round props make a lot of sense. I would say the over 2.5 rounds here with the Allan Patrick Michael Johnson fight makes a lot of sense as well at minus 160. That's a very good spot. And then if you come down here to the Blachowicz and Rakic fight, over 3.5 rounds, I think that's cash money. I don't expect one of these guys to win inside that time, and if they do, then it's going to be Jan Blachowicz. I don't think the Aleksandar Rakic is knocking out Jan in this spot. And if we open that fight up and we take a look at what the odds for that could possibly be, we look at Blachowicz by knockout at plus 450. You think that's the way that this goes? I think that makes sense. You have the same exact odds for him to win by decision as well. If we come up here to the Tatsuro fight and we look at what his line is by submission, we have plus 200. That's not bad. I really like that. Nick Maximov versus Andre Petroski. You're looking at a situation where you could take Maximov at plus 120, or you could take Petroski by knockout at plus 1400. I think that's egregious. That's kind of like Joe Anderson Brito against Andre Feely a couple weeks ago. Cutelaba versus Ryan Spann. So if we come down here, Ryan Spann by knockout is plus 475. Cutelaba by decision, if you wanted to go the other way, is plus 750, which I think is totally on the table. And then this fight, the Frank Camacho Manuel Torres fight, we could come down here to find the KO prop for the fight. Where is it? Right down here, exact method of victory, knockout is minus 125. I think one of these guys is going down, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be Frank Camacho. So if you wanted to sweeten the deal at plus 200, you can go the Manuel Torres route. But if you want to be safer, I think this makes a lot of sense as well. And if we're looking at the entire card and you wanted to parlay the entire thing together, this is what I would do. We've got Petroski, Tatsuro, got Angela Hill, we've got Allan Patrick, Lee. We're looking at, I would say Jake Hadley for the sake of this here, but I think Nascimento has some value. We've got Torres, we've got Ribas, Grant, Cutelaba for the sake of this. And then we've got Blachowicz down here. So obviously you parlay all that up. You've got a good mix of dogs here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So maybe a little bit more than I was anticipating before. 5 out of 11 seems high. So if you wanted to take some of them off, like for example, if you wanted to go the other way in the Nick Maximov fight, if you wanted to go the other way in the Chookagian fight, now we're closer to having just the 3 underdogs. I think that makes sense as well. $25 bet. You're looking at a $10,000 payout. Good luck to you all. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I can bring more of this to you.